Okay, so in this session I'm going to talk about how to avoid mold during germination. And this is a question a lot of people have, and it's a problem a lot of people have. So one of the ways we're going to kind of look at this is by showing you a situation where you're very much likely to get mold. So yesterday I did a video on just water movement within soil, and I used this tray as one of my demo trays. And as a result, it has a lot of water in it. It's completely saturated. So when I say it's saturated, a soil has what we call macropore space, which is the space between the particles, and then it has micropore space, which is the space within the particles. And when you have a saturated soil, all of those particles, both the micro and macro pores, are filled with soil, or with water, sorry. And that's the situation here. So not ideal, because if there's water in all that pore space, it means there's no air in that pore space. And just like we talk about airflow being important for reducing disease in your growing system in particular, we're kind of looking at the same concept in our soil, where you need air movement within the soil as well. Now, it's not going to move the same way it is in the atmosphere with the movement of fans and things like that, but it's kind of a similar concept. So the general idea is good airflow is important for reducing molds. In the atmosphere, we use fans to keep the air circulating. In our soil, what we try to do is make sure there's airspace in the pores and it's not all saturated with water. So I'm in a situation here where I'm likely going to get mold. And I almost want to purposely get mold just to prove how good I am at getting mold on my crops. That said, at the moment, I'm really wanting to eat all my crops, so I don't want to get mold. I actually want it to be a nice crop. So I'm just adjusting something here. Okay. So what I'm going to do while at the same time as having mold issues or being in a position for mold, I'm going to show you how to mitigate it at the same time. Okay. So we have a lot of moisture in here. I have my seeds here ready to go. I'm doing a crop of sunflower. So how do we mitigate this? Because the reality is I even need to put a little bit more water in here so I can water the seeds in. And when we think about the role of moisture in the soil, its role is to make sure that that moisture stays in the seed. So we want the seed in good contact with the soil so the soil can transfer the water into the seed. That's why we want it there. Now, I'm going to do a couple things here to try and mitigate this problem. So one is I'm actually going to rough up this soil a little bit. So in even just a short time, that's going to allow a little bit of air to get out of there, or a little bit of water to get out of there, sorry. I'm going to smooth this out a little bit. So along the surface, things are a little rougher. There's a little more pore space. There's a little more space on the surface there. So that's going to help a little bit. I kind of want to get mold in this tray. I'll admit it now, but I kind of don't at the same time. Okay. Second thing is my seeds are ready to go here. I soaked these ones for about 5 hours, which is longer than I'd usually soak sunflower. Usually 1.5 to 2 is working with this lot of seeds, but I was doing other things. So I'm going to just make sure they're wet. So I'm just dipping them quickly in a water bath here. So they're nice and wet. I'm going to get any excess moisture off of there. And now I'm going to put these on top of the tray. So I'm doing about 130 grams worth of seed for this tray of the sunflower. And then I'm going to spread these out, as we usually do. Seed distribution actually is actually quite important in this as well. If the seeds are too close together, that can cause a bit of mold, and when you get it, it spreads fairly quickly. So making sure you have really even distribution is good. You're also going to get much better growth that way. Okay, so my seeds are really fairly well distributed here. Maybe you can let's take a look. I do another distribution after I've watered it because it makes it just a little easier to see. So now usually what I do is I would water this in with my watering can here. But because the soil already has a lot of moisture in it, I want to avoid putting any more moisture in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give these a spray. So I do want to make sure I've got good moisture in here. Now I'm going to tell you that this is just water, but it's not. It's water and Epsom salts. I don't think that's going to make a difference. I just needed the water, and that's the spray bottle I had. And then once I spray them, it kind of cleans things up, and I can see where some of the bare spots are and whatnot, so I can redistribute that. So now my tray is ready to go. So I've tried to mitigate what I'm sure is going to be an inevitable problem. But the most important thing here is to avoid that in the first place. And this is a challenge because you want to have enough moisture in your soil to allow the seed to germinate successfully. If there's not enough moisture, the seed will not germinate very well, and you'll see that. And if there's too much, you're going to get mold. So that's really important. Now, a question a lot of people ask is, well, while it's germinating, why not uncover the tray and give it some water? And that's going to keep it well watered. So there's 3 reasons not to do that, and especially on a commercial scale when you've got a lot of trays to manage. Number 1 is it takes time. And if you've got 200 trays or 300 trays in a batch and you're going to uncover each of those and you're going to water them and then you're going to cover them up again, that's going to take time. And that's time that has a cost to it in many different ways. One could be financially. One could be that if you're doing this task, there's another task that you're not doing. And the third thing is you could be doing something else completely, like being at home. So these are things to consider. The second thing is lifting a heavy tray off the top, because we stack these with pressure. It disrupts growth. It disrupts the roots and it can set them back a little bit, and we want to avoid that. And then the third thing is it actually risks contaminating your crop. Now, one of my general rules of thumb when growing is to interact with the crop as little as possible. You kind of just want to let it do its thing, and at each stage in the process, you're just trying to set it up to be optimized for optimal production. And so I try to interact as little as possible. And there's always a possibility every time you interact with your crops that you're bringing a contaminant from somewhere else in the system or from outside the system. So we're just avoiding that completely. So these are just some things to keep in mind, but the general principle here is airflow. We want good airflow in our atmospheric environment, and we want good airflow in the soil. The way we have good airflow in the soil is by making sure there's not too much water in there so that it's infiltrating all the pore space. We've got some water in there, we've got some air in our soil, and that's going to create ideal conditions for germination and really reduce the risk of mold. This tray is going to get covered up today. And so we'll know in about 4 days how successful this is. I do expect some mold on this tray, and if we get it, we'll take a look at some means of mitigating that once you've discovered mold. So that's all I'm going to cover here, and I'll be back in a little bit to talk about how to maximize production space in your home growing environment.